mystery of the Scottish stone spheres, prehistoric geometry and the Tiwanaku connection. This is a lecture looking at these obscure and bizarre stone geometric spheres that have been found in Neolithic or near Neolithic stone circles in ancient Scotland. But also we're going to look at the hidden geometry, some of the sites that they're found at, and also one that was found about 6,000 miles away. My name's Hugh Newman. I've been researching ancient mysteries for many years. The last couple of years I've been really focused on trying to understand what these were all about. Professor Alexander Thom, who actually was involved in surveying many of these stone circles and ancient sites in Britain and Brittany, gives a good quote as to the sophistication of what we're dealing with here. I'll read this out. Only in the period when megalithic man was setting out the sophisticated stone rings has a sufficiently high standard of mathematical knowledge and skill ever been reached before the 15th century AD. Even today, there are few archaeologists capable of appreciating the underlying geometry. Now in this, he's talking about mainly the geometry of the stone circles, which we'll have a brief look at during the lecture, and I featured in one of the other lectures in detail in this series. But it's these stone spheres that really fascinate me. Now, the one on the left here, so this is actually not one of the stone spheres. This is actually interesting because it's a Roman sphere found in France, made of metal. So they were still creating these dodecahedral shapes, even up to the times of the Romans. As for these, over 420 have been found in the vicinity of Neolithic stone circles in northern Scotland. 169 of them come from Aberdeenshire alone. Outside Scotland, examples have been found in Orkney, Ireland, and even in England at Durham, Cumbria, Lowick and Bridlington. Here are some of the examples. Now, one of the interesting things about these is that they fit in the size of your hand. They're roughly the size of tennis balls or a bit smaller, and they have multiple different geometries and different shapes and different amounts of protrusions on them. Some date from 3200 BC, potentially right up to about 1500 BC. Some show beautiful craftsmanship and symmetry. Others show extreme mastery of working with stone, while others look some rough, badly made or unfinished. However, some of the better examples seem to be within a few millimeters of size of each other, suggesting they were using a standard unit of measure, perhaps the megalithic inch, which was again discovered by Professor Alexander Thom. This is East Ackworth's stone circle in Aberdeenshire. It's one of the recumbent stone circles, they're called, and the interesting thing about these is that they're in a circular arrangement with a large flat stone at usually the southwest kind of area, with two what are called flankers on either side. And over 150 have been recorded in Scotland. There were probably many, many more. And again, I talk about these in more detail in the other lecture in the series. And this just shows you, what it looks like from the air. This one's kind of been reconstructed, but it's in the area of these circles where most of these stone spheres have been found. Not right inside the circles. These spheres are found in fields around the circles, often where crops had been growing, suggesting they were placed there deliberately for a purpose to do with agriculture. It could be to charge up the landscape, it could be energetic, it could be ceremonial, or it could be a more ritual purpose of laying them out in the land to give the land some of the energy that is being put into the spheres themselves. Other examples of the stone circle, this is an interesting one that's actually within a church. It's called Midmar Kirk. Most of the circles are 60 foot to 80 feet wide. This one's obviously been Christianized inside a churchyard. But it's really this area and the people who were building these stone circles that were working with making these strange, mysterious stone spheres. This circle is called Sunhoney, and this is one of the many circles these spheres were found near. It's been speculated by Andrew Young, when he was an archaeology student at the University of Exeter, that the stone spheres may have been used to actually move the stones for the stone circles, that they're rolling the stones on them. Now, and also another idea that was put forward by this gentleman was the very act of carving the spheres could actually be part of the ceremonial process of creating them. This just shows you some examples of the different types of recumbent stones with the flankers on either side around parts of Aberdeenshire. And they kind of frame the moon set and the moon movements throughout the year. And so it becomes a kind of almost like a viewing screen to see the movement of the moon, because at this latitude of 57 and upwards degrees, it's very useful because the moon often rolls across the landscape and doesn't fully set at certain times of year. And some suggest, especially with the recumbent circle of Cothymeia Wood, for instance, that the path of the full midsummer moon would be framed within these particular alignments of stones. And the location they found, again being up very high up in a high latitude, they're ideal to observe the minor and major lunar standstill, which is an 18.6 year cycle. Callanish is known for the Sleeping Beauty at the extremes of this cycle. The last one actually witnessed in 2006, where the moon rolls along what's called the Sleeping Beauty mountain range on the horizon. This just shows you where stone spheres have been found in an archaeological context, where they've been located near stone circles or cairns or other burial sites up in Aberdeenshire. And it's this area here we're really looking at, the sort of northern eastern part of Scotland, where most of the spheres have been found. These are the ones with 3 protrusions or 4 protrusions. These are ones with between 4 and 6 on them, so they're different shapes and sizes. But a few have been found further south as well, in an island here as well, you can see, and in Cumberland, Cumbria area. The majority are found between the Moray Firth and the River Tay in the east, the fertile lands east of the Grampian Mountains. Many people believed they were part of the Picts. They were a Pictish origin. Only a few have been found in Skye-Erna, Lewis, Harris, Euston, Arran, and 2 came from Harwick and a few from Wigtownshire, and possibly 14 now have been found on Orkney, which we're going to have a look at in more detail later. He shows you some other types, between 5 and 7, 6, 8 and 9 protrusions, 7 to 10 to 55 protrusions. There's even some with 56 protrusions on them, individual stones that are only about this big. And there was ones with spirals, concentric circles, cross-hatching and other types found in these particular areas. Not many have been found in archaeological context. Some were found at Karabrae, and more recently some were found in the Ness of Brodgar. One was found about 5 years ago there, and usually they're found, in fields, like I said, sometimes in the burials. There's one example of a burial with actually a very large skeleton that we're going to feature in the upcoming book about the giants of Stonehenge in ancient Britain. Alexander Smith in 1876 records 8 balls found in or near kists or cysts or cairns or tumuli. And so these are quite interesting. So we do have some found actually in archaeological context, but not too many. These are some of the mounds, some of the structures they were found in, tumuli. And also an interesting one with 6 protrusions was found near the Druid Circle in Loch and Head. And interestingly, there you get these cut marks on the stone. You can't see them too clearly, but there are some examples on here. Cut mark stones are found all over this part of the country. And so there's a connection potentially between the cut marks and the spheres perhaps being placed inside the cut marks for some unknown purpose. They fit nicely into one's hand, and so they've been described as hunting projectiles, fishing weights. In 1876, J. Alexander Smith said they could have had attachment to wooden handles for axes, but it's very unlikely because, as Dorothy N. Marshall, who's one of the main researchers on these, they're beautifully created. They're created with artistic merit in mind. And surely they would have been chipped. I mean, look at this one here. This is absolutely amazing. This one here as well. And you can see the beautiful detail. So this is showing very high levels of craftsmanship in some of the spheres. With a geometer's eye, Professor Keith Critchlow, author of Time Stands Still, saw something that no one had really noted before. And he collected and he looked at many of the spheres and found that many of them, and a certain selection, actually represent the 5 Platonic solids that were first discovered and published by Plato. And you can see examples of them here, and he features this in detail in his book Time Stands Still. And I quote, he said, "What we have are objects clearly indicative of a degree of mathematical ability so far denied to Neolithic man by any archaeologist or mathematical historian, except of course for Alexander Thom." And even this, we even get combinations, Archimedean solids. This is a cube and an octahedron combined. These are the corners of the cube here. You can't see the two bottom ones. And the points of these would be an octahedron. And they nest within each other. This is something that Plato believes, it's believed he was the first person to really talk about this. But actually the nesting is something that's found in the Scottish stone spheres, perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 earlier, 1,000 years earlier than previously realised. These are actually on display at the British Museum. There were more on display. There were more in their stores down below in the warehouse, but they only have 3 on display. These are all from Aberdeenshire. But the numbers of protrusions do range from 3 to 160, which is a remarkable feat considering their size. But all show appreciation of symmetry. And if not symmetry, they show very artistic skill. And this is what Alison Roberts noted, who's a curator at the museum. One 14-sided sphere, for example, is composed of 2 opposite hexagons surrounded by 6 pentagons, which is remarkable in its own right. So they were combining different geometries, and we'll see that the one discovered at the Ness of Brodgar, Nicholas Cope's done some analysis on that, and he's realised that's a very complicated geometry, even though it looks like it's kind of a bit messy and unfinished. Alexander Thom believes they are proof that megalithic man was able to use these solid geometries, and they had a perfect mastery of this subject. Other researchers and academics believed they weren't, and they were very simple. This is actually the one discovered on the Ness of Brodgar we're going to look at in more detail shortly, but this is one of the only ones that's been found in an archaeological context, which dates to at least probably 3,200 to 3,500 BC. But at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, there are some examples on display. And you can just see one of them here. This is a sandstone sphere, it's a cube octahedron, it's the one we looked at a moment ago. And this is found somewhere near Aberdeen in 1885. This has got, again, this is the same one in 1885 from a different angle. This one's got 14 bosses, they're called, like protrusions, found in Kincardineshire. This just shows you 2 of them together. And here's all 5 that were in the Ashmolean Museum, but they only put 2 or 3 on display. But these are the other ones in their storage, which I can't believe they don't put them all on display, to be honest with you. But most of these were found in Aberdeenshire in the late 1880s. The British Museum ones we just looked at previously, and here's another angle on it. This one is currently on display as of the beginning of 2019 in Stonehenge Visitor Centre at Stonehenge itself. There's another possible cube octahedron actually inside the Salisbury Museum. There's myself and researcher J.J. Ainsworth investigated this, and we found one there. You can see they're not very big, they're just smaller than a tennis ball. But again, you can see they're all over the place. There's 420. Not all of them have been are on display, obviously. But Karabrae in Orkney, this is a fascinating site. This goes back to at least 3,100 or more BC. It's on the west coast in the Bay of Scale on Orkney, and it's a complete Neolithic village, and it was only discovered not that long ago, less than 100 years ago. You can just get a sense of the location here, and they have all these beautiful kind of almost like stone houses built within the site itself. You can see the beautiful bay there. I managed to get some aerial shots of that. Some are on display in the museum, and others are on display in some of the major museums in Glasgow and in Edinburgh. It shows you another shot of the site itself. But they are stylistically quite similar to designs and geometries and carvings we find in the Boyne Valley of Ireland. And there's even some bedpost and kind of upright stones or orthostats that are kind of lying on their side, like you can see here. One of these in Karabrae, it's actually got some beautiful carvings on them that looks just like what we find on the stones. You can see those here. See, these are all from Karabrae, and Newgrange has been compared to them. So we're finding the same kind of styles on different sides of the ocean, of the sea there. These are the ones found at Karabrae. Very unusual. This one isn't a sphere. This one almost looks like some dangerous weapon, but this one's got that beautiful carving on it that we saw, which is similar to what we find in the Boyne Valley. That's just a close-up of the one with the multiple bosses on it. And this is the one with what looks like some kind of mathematics or language on it. It's been referred to as runic writing, but it looks like it is some kind of language. They're not sure what exactly. And these are on display in the Karabrae Visitor Centre. This is a close-up of some of them. Didn't get the best photos. The light was very rough there, very dark, so you couldn't get it. And there's some really randomly kind of rough-hewn shaped ones as well, and what looks like unfinished or badly weathered ones. And again, the one with multiple bosses. I'm not sure what happened to that one. And then interestingly, there's actually a whole stone where they could fit through. So was it part of a game? Was it part of a ritual? Again, this one here, which is unique in its own right. And then we have this one here, which is very interesting. This, no one really knows exactly what this is, but again, it's got some kind of formulas or language carved on it. It kind of looks like some kind of weapon again, but it would be quite an inconvenient weapon. This is on display at the Edinburgh National Museum of Scotland. You can see another angle of it there, but this is carved out of solid basalt, I believe. So there's quite a lot going on. There's quite a lot of these strange artifacts. In Coyness, these are from Coyness in the museum in Edinburgh. Again, these are quite strange carvings. But the Ness of Brodgar, this is very interesting place. It's very close to the Ring of Brodgar that we can see here. The Ness of Brodgar is actually here. It's an archaeological complex of similar to Karabrae in some ways. This is the major stone circle at the Ring of Brodgar. And over at the end here we have Steness, we have Maes Howe over in this direction, and this is mainland Orkney. This is the Steness stone circle. And not much is left of it, but these are the classic blade stones. They're very tall, they're like 12 to 15 feet tall. But it's believed that the Ness of Brodgar and this area here could have been some kind of ancient Neolithic university where the stone spheres were manufactured, the megalithic yard was created, mathematics and language were developed here. And even the famous pottery, so there were certain styles that were developed here, such as grooved ware, unstan and so forth, and they may have been developed here and then spread out. And you can see this is the circle, and this is the Ness of Brodgar archaeological area here, which you can see in more detail here. And that's Stennis just over there. But, you know, as London is the cultural hub of today, 5,000 years ago, Orkney could have been the centre of innovation of Britain. And ideas may have spread southwards. This is one of the theories that is emerging, that this was like the origin point of the ancient knowledge and the ancient teachings that were being spread through, even all the way through Europe. In Structure 10 in the Ness of Brodgar, this is currently under excavation. They do it every year for 2 months in the summer. First discovered this Structure 10 in 2008. It had a temple-like structure, multiple walls, and this is the area where the stone sphere was actually found. And I think this part dates to around 2900 BC. This is Nick Card, he's the head archaeologist there. And they believe there was some kind of ceremonial demolition, including the slaughter of hundreds of cattle. And 400 cows, or at least bones of cows, were found in this particular area. And it was like a close down of the site around 2900 to 2800 BC. Very interesting place, but the site itself, you know, within an archaeological context between some of the stones, this sphere was found, and this is now on display at the Kirkwall Museum in Orkney. A gold version has been created, which I would really like to own, and this is the original one here. It just shows you all about the discovery here. There's no carvings, there's no spirals or anything on them. But interestingly, Nicholas Cope, my colleague and friend of mine, who are going to be running a tour to Orkney together in August, realised that it's quite important. And and so what he found was on the Nap of Howard, which is a site on one of the islands, he found the geometry matched a kind of one angle view of a dodecahedron, suggesting that the structures on Orkney may have been based upon 3D geometry. Therefore, this is how these could have been created. And he found out when he did some research on this, and this is a triangular prism, this is a certain geometrical form. If it's rotated in certain ways within a sphere, you actually get this stone sphere geometry emerging from it. And he spoke about this at the Megalithomania conference in 2007, gave a fantastic lecture, which you can watch online. And we're going to be heading back up there in August to explore all these sites in Orkney. And more were discovered in these are all on display in the Kirkwall Museum. Some interesting, this is actually found near Maze Howe, which is one of the main mounds. And this actually looks, it's got an indentation in it, not dissimilar to a very tiny Death Star from Star Wars. This is a regularly shaped stone. Again, we find many of these over Orkney. Very strange ones like this one here. It looks like some kind of animal. And more examples were upstairs in the museum. I'm not sure if these are still on display, but James Walls Cursiter, who was a researcher, antiquarian and explorer, collected some of these spheres, and some of them are actually on display now. And these are from different parts of Scotland, different parts of Orkney, from all the different islands here. And you can see some of the variations in design. This almost looks like it's been softened. Looks like clay, doesn't it? This one's got concentric circles on it. We'll have a closer look at some of these. And there's an old antiquarian photograph of when they were first discovered. This one's a rough-hewn sphere, not much to see on that one. But this one is the interesting one, with the strange kind of protrusions and angles. And then it has a kind of almost, it looks like icing on a cake going around the edge. And again, multiple bosses on this one. That was found on Sanday, an island of Orkney. Again, Sanday. And here's the one with the concentric circles on it, beautifully carved. You imagine how difficult that would be to get precision carvings on this kind of very hard, dark basalt stone. It's remarkable, and it's just in its own right. It's an artistic, very artistic. Again, this one's a bit more rough-hewn, but worth including in the lecture so you get a comprehensive overview of these particular spheres. There's another one here. This has I believe six bosses, or seven perhaps. And some of them do have irregular shapes. This is a perfectly carved sphere. This one was found in Lochnagar. It's not on display anywhere that I'm aware of, but you can see, again, it's got multiple concentric stone circles with these small bosses in between. So again, very, very interesting. Now we made our way over to Aberdeen to go to some of the museums there, to look at some of the stone circles, and some were on display at the King's Museum. Only 3. There are more actually in their collection, but they only let us look at 3, unfortunately. But some of the classic ones are here. We have this one here with the grid patterns over it. This one here with the sort of multi-layered bosses. And again, these are just very fine examples of craftsmanship on the spheres, and you can go and see these for yourself if you're up in Aberdeen. The National Museum in Edinburgh. Yeah, this is a very interesting museum. There's a lot going on in here, but we were really here to see the spheres. These are the ones they've got on display. And you can see these examples here. These are the main ones from Karabrae. This one is actually the Towie ball. And there's some other examples from the area here. This one's from Orkney. These are from Aberdeenshire. But this one here is very, very interesting. We'll look at it in a moment. And you can see some detail on these. Unfortunately, it's very, very dark. They don't light the place very well to protect them. There's some other examples we found in a different room from Bogmill and Mount Blairy, both Aberdeenshire area, I believe. There's some better angles on them here. And there just happened to be a giant sword in the museum nearby as well, which I thought was quite interesting, which we're going to discuss in our forthcoming book about the giants of Britain. But the Towie ball is probably the most famous of all of the spheres. And you can see that here. You can see the precision stone carving and the stonework. Again, it looks like it's been softened. This is a photo by Martin Morrison. He managed to get some fantastic photos of these spheres. with a much better camera than me. And here's a photo of it that featured in Keith Critchlow's book, and a beautiful illustration showing you all the detail of the sphere here. I mean, look at that. I mean, you imagine that is, you know, the size just smaller than, it's like the size of an apple, smaller than a tennis ball. And look at the detail here, it's unbelievable. Beautifully done. And obviously these spirals are interesting. These are found in other parts of the world. We have even cut marks on them here, which look like representations of the cut marks you find on the megalithic sites throughout northern Britain and Scotland. Here's another older photo showing some of the detail. And you can see if they're, you know, they're working that as hard stone, that's incredibly difficult to do. But like I said, spirals are not just found in this part of the world, they're found all over the place. I've seen them, you know, as far and wide as Tiwanaku in Bolivia, Malta, Newgrange Island, obviously, even in France and other places. These are the Glasgow museums. There's various ones on display here. The first one we went to was the Hunterian Museum, which is a private museum, very interesting. And these are the ones they have on display. So they have like 12 on display. They do have more in their collection. They have 27 in total, but they don't put them on display. Every museum we went to have more in their collection, but don't put them on display. And to me, this is baffling. Why not just have them all on display? It's not like they're taking up much room. And you can see some of the variations and examples here. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you can just appreciate the quality of the craftsmanship and the inner geometry. There's one with 7 protrusions, there's one with 14, there's one even with 86 on it, which I believe is this one here. So there's some varying geometries and varying styles found at this particular museum. This is from Hill Head, St Ola and Orkney. Very unusual design. This has got 86 raised bosses. This is just from the A. Henderson Bishop collection from Aberdeenshire. This is just one from Red Moss, Aberdeenshire. And there's more. We can look at them in more detail if you look at the article I've written about these. But the Kelvingrove Art Gallery and Museum has some fine examples on display. There's 3 or 4 here. The three here are very, very good. They're very beautifully carved. You can see all these here. I have close-up shots of these on a video I produced, on a 40-minute video you can watch on YouTube. If you want to see more detail of these, if you're interested. And we discuss the measurements and other such things. But yeah, these are found in all in Aberdeenshire. The one, I'm not exactly sure where this one came from. This one's from Alford, this one's from Turriff. Shows you more detail. But each of these corners is different. They have different, they have like sort of waves here, cut marks here, triangles here, and lines here. See more detail there. This is the classic 6 bossed ball. And this one looks like it could have had rope or string tied around it, which is one of the early theories that they were used for some kind of bowlers or hunting tools. So yeah, these are the main ones on display at the Kelvingrove Museum. There's even one found, there's 3 found in England altogether. This one was found in Cumbria, in the Eden Valley. Again, this is the classic, I think this has only got 4 sides on it, actually. It's quite intriguing. There's even one found near Bridlington in Britain, in England. And this is right near the Rudston Monolith, which is the largest standing stone in Britain. Now inside a churchyard with all these tiny little gravestones next to it. That's something like 24 feet tall. Where this one is and what it looks like, we don't know. All we have is a reference to it in one of the academic papers written about this particular site. Now, this one, interestingly, is on display in London. So this could be the Bridlington one. I haven't managed to find this museum yet, but this is very, very interesting. I only came across this photo quite recently. Someone sent it to me. Again, we have the spirals here. Then we have the cut marks, the spirals in the corners. Very beautiful piece. There are different theories as to how they were created and why they were created. Firstly, in 1914, Ludovic Mann suggested they were used as weight to some kind of scales due to their exact size and geometry. Another hypothesis, they were used to roll megalith across distances, which we discussed briefly earlier. Another, that they were used as oracles by rolling them on the ground and interpreting the future from both the way they rolled and the positions they rested in. Just recently went to a Christmas party at Stonehenge, met Santa there. That was very interesting. My friend Nori Paris, and they actually have one on display, and they actually create them there. There was a craftsman there who actually, this one was on display at the British Museum. It's now at Stonehenge. You can go and see it there. But a craftsman actually created one from scratch, from a rough-hewn stone, and it took him 40 hours to create a simple one like this. 40 hours. So you imagine what it's like to create a very sophisticated one, such as one of these. You can imagine it would take slightly more than 40 hours. These are, again, very fine examples from various parts of Scotland. The top one here, number one, sorry, up here, I think that's from Aberdeenshire. Number 2 is from Fife. Number 3 is from Sutherland. This one here, I believe, this one. 4 from Moray. 5 from Perth. So this is very interesting selection from different parts of Scotland. Again, some of these I don't know where they are, so it's difficult to find exactly where they are. So there are different theories about them. This is one theory where you roll the stones around to have oracles. Some people suggest you do it on the beach. So you do them in sand, so then it would create a pattern in the ground and you'd read it like an oracle, like we previously mentioned. My friend, an author, Laird Scranton, sent this over, and he noticed this in a sand bowl in, I believe, in an artist's studio. And it looks like a hobby for artists who are creating these as kind of toys for children to roll around, but I can't imagine the Scottish stone spheres were created for that. Interestingly, while there's various researchers and there's the uniformity in size does lend credence to the theory that, and the opinion of Major Colville, who was a farmer in Kenya, who said his farm workers in Kenya were suspicious of weighing and preferring to have their meals issued to them by measure. And he felt that the Neolithic people might feel the same. So when they were being fed in their communities, they wanted it to weigh the same as their stone sphere, which is unusual, doesn't really make sense to me. But this is a weighing weight used by the Vikings from the Byzantine period from Scandinavia. So we have these here used by Vikings as well, which is quite intriguing. A more strange idea is that they are representations of pollen or even atoms. And how they would have been able to see microscopic particles is not being confirmed. But the similarities are quite interesting. When you start looking at pollen and atoms, you see the geometries here. This is almost identical to this one. So that is an intriguing aspect. And it makes me wonder, were they using some kind of shamanic tools to kind of see into very small particles or to sense the size and geometry of these particular things? And other geometries do pop up when you start looking at pollen, viruses, and other such things. I mean, these are just very interesting, the way these do seem to kind of confirm these particular types of geometry. But the most interesting, I think, theory has been put forward by Jeff Nisbet, who's a researcher, and he wrote an article for some magazines. And he believes it was the megalithic architect's symbol of their skill of working stone, almost like a CV or resume. And they were like a certain design spec, and it would show your prospective stone circle building company, hey, this is how good I am, this is what I can produce. Can I come and work for you, kind of thing. So you show them the sphere and so on. And they were never found in graves, or very rarely found in graves. So it suggests that he was passed on from generation to generation, as though they were they had some meaning for the families or the tribes who created them. And they may have been passed on to new graduates as teaching tools. Now, although they were labelled as projectiles, that doesn't really make sense, and this has been confirmed because very little damage has been found on them. And this one here fascinates me. This is absolutely beautiful. It doesn't say exactly where it's from. We haven't got the full details on that one. This one here is very interesting. It's got smaller bosses on it. This is the one we saw in the museum in Aberdeen. again, the Towie ball, which is probably the most sophisticated one ever discovered. But we do have the geometries. We have to look at it from a geometric perspective. At the top we have a cube. At the bottom we have a cube and a octahedron, which is a dual, or a nesting within one another. These are from Dundee Museum and show a tetrahedral, icosahedron and octahedron, which are from Time Stands Still from Keith Critchlow. And his research did show that if he compiled all the different spheres he studied into one unified system, it was remarkably similar to the Earth grid theory, which is another lecture I've done in this series, and I mentioned this in that lecture. And it does seem to fit with the idea that they may have been trying to represent the Earth in a geometrical form, which later Plato did, when he was talking about the Earth representing a ball made from 12 pieces of skin. And so there are correlations with the Earth grid, and it would be more representative of what they believed the Earth, the way they could see the Earth. And there are different researchers have found different patterns which they believe show mathematical formulas. You can see that here. So they could have been used as like calculators, as mathematical tools, and also working on the twin variables of shape and material. The spirals could be reflecting telluric currents that move in similar configurations. And it's thought that geometric shapes, in ancient traditions at least, were thought to have an effect on consciousness. And even modern technology uses, it's based mainly really on twin variables of shape and material, where different shapes create different energetic effects, just as different materials offer different useful energetic qualities. And like the geometric temples of the megalith builders, perhaps the handheld devices were as powerful then as modern handheld devices are today. For example, a smartphone, a compass, a GPS, theodolite, magnetic detectors, and so on and so forth. Now, almost useless as a hunting projectile, like iPhones are, these could have been the hidden knowledge, the handheld device that the ancients used for the purposes were very similar to what we use them for today. There's also the study of cymatics, which it could be representations of that, because it's been found that many of these ancient temples, chambers, stone circles and other such things have been found to be acoustically designed. So were they representations of a cymatic effect where sound would affect matter and they would represent it in the sphere? There's a couple have been discovered in Loughru Island. These are quite intriguing. I found these very, very interesting actually, because these are perfectly spherical, and it does really question as to what their purpose was. And interestingly, one of them is made of ironstone, another one of granite. So we have one which is negatively magnetic and one which is positively magnetic. And so some people suggest that these could have been even used, as I've mentioned briefly, that they could have been placed in fields to enhance the crops and grains. As we know, these ancient sites were often built with fertility in mind. And it has been proven that these opposing forces, if placed together, can increase growth in seeds. It could have even affected the earth energy currents or the telluric currents. So yeah, we do find these very difficult to carve because they're very hard rock. This is actually Loughru, and you can see some of the there. And also Loughru itself has these spiral patterns which we find on some of the Scottish stone spheres. So is there a connection? Some people even suggest that they were indeed used for healing, and like they were actually used in like hot stone massages today to actually, rub the back and get into tight knots and muscles, and they may have been charged up with some kind of natural earth energy, and then that would use as a healing or spiritual or even ritual effect, or a combination of all. So there is, a suggestion that they could have had multiple purposes. But I think one of the most interesting aspects for me is the fact that they're not just found in Britain. One absolutely blew my mind. This could be a huge coincidence, but I actually spotted one when I was traveling in South America. This is on display at the Tiwanaku Museum in La Paz town, in La Paz city. It's got 6 protrusions on it. It's almost exactly the same as some of the ones we've already seen today. But what's it doing 6,000 miles away, within a few miles of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku? Did the Scots get out that way? Unlikely, but this just shows you, you know, we'll just have a quick scan round with the camera to get a sense of what it looks like. And you can see it's identical to ones we've seen in ancient Scotland. And even at Tiwanaku itself, we do find that there are spirals and almost exactly the same kind of patterns and shapes and cut marks and other things carved on the stones at Tiwanaku or nearby as there are on some of the spheres in ancient Scotland. So this has brought up many questions, you know, as to diffusionism, or is it just a coincidence? And you can see more detail here with this on it. But to me, I think, you know, we've covered many different theories as to exactly what they could have been used for, but there may be other theories emerging. And the fact that we're finding hidden geometry going back 5,000 years in ancient Scotland, and there's suggestions now that these people could well have influenced people throughout Britain and potentially around the world. It does suggest there may be more to these small megalithic spheres than meets the eye. And of course, you can join us in Orkney to see some of these spheres in August, and thank you very much for listening.